Wow, you've come a long way. I can't believe we've still got most of you. Yeah, you're still awake. Um, this is the last session officially of mine, although we'll have a panel tomorrow, and I'm sure a few other conversations tonight and tomorrow. But I'm going to keep this short because I really do feel that you've had an awful lot of content, and there's an awful lot to kind of pull apart and think about. So I'm going to try and kind of 30, 35 minutes. And I want to look at the technology. So we've looked at theory, and then I want to just do a few words on technology. And by technology, I mean the technology of the self, the way in which we might live out some of the themes that we've talked about. Because the practice of this is very different from talking about it. In Icon, I remember when I came to America, the first time I went to America, I took a few Icon people, and we did a conference a little bit like this, and we were talking about the Icon stuff that we do. And outside, a couple of people were having a smoke, and we were out there, and somebody said, "Oh, what do you think? What's your favorite book that Pete wrote, or whatever?" To one of the Icon people, and they both looked at each other and laughed and said, "We've never read any of his books, right?" And then they said, "This is the first time we've heard him speak, do actually a proper talk," and the person he asked was kind of surprised because, of course, in their head, because they'd heard of me and they'd read a book of mine, they kind of thought that back in Icon, I would do this, talk and tell Seamus stories, and that people would have read my books. But no, not at all. They allowed me 5 minutes to speak in an Icon gathering. That was it, because they were worried that I would just talk on and on, So I had my 5 minutes. I was, of course, very key in helping to set these events up. But they weren't talk shops. This was not a place to go and discuss things. Afterwards, so over a drink, yeah, we could chat, but that wasn't the purpose. It was a type of technology. It was a type of inviting people into an experience that hopefully would be of benefit and would be transformative. In fact, we use the term transformance art, and which somebody else came up with. I read a review of an Icon gathering, and someone said, "Oh, felt like performance art," or perhaps I should say transformance art. And I thought, that sounds great. Okay, I'll use that. So we started using the term transformance art. But before I look at that, and I'll probably say only a few words about the Icon events, because to be honest, I don't think they're going to be of much use to you guys, because they were done, outside of the church environment, and they were things that we set up once a month, and people here are probably involved in weekly gatherings and involved in more in a community. Icon was less of a community and more of like a pub, a crowd. We got together once a month, we did these events, and then we kind of went off, and we had friendships, but it was less of a community, so I don't know how valuable it would be to talk about transformance art too much. But very quickly, I have to tell one last Seamus story, because, I would be remiss not to. He is my hero after all. And this story, I think, captures maybe what we're trying to do with the technology of church, what we're trying to invite people into. And it's a story about Seamus, who he entered a competition to build a sheep pen, right? So in Belfast, there was a call for this competition, and we're going to put it on national TV. And it sounds boring, but you know that the television in the old days is terrible here. Americans don't understand that we used to watch things like One Man and His Dog, where it's like you'd actually watch that on TV. That was your Saturday night entertainment. One man blowing whistles so a dog would put sheep in the pen. I remember that when I was a kid. So this was like sheep pen building competition. They were given some materials, and they were given 24 hours. There was an architect and an engineer also in the competition. So at the end of 24 hours, the judges come to the first person, the engineer, and the engineer's built this interesting sheep pen, all the materials being used, and it houses 100 sheep. And very good. And then they go to the architect, and the architect has found a clever way of cutting the material so that they can make it slightly bigger, and it holds 150 sheep. And then they're kind of go over to see Seamus's sheep pen, and Seamus is actually just sitting out in the sun, getting an Irish tan, red, and all the materials around. And when he sees the judges coming, he quickly gets up and knocks a few pieces of wood together to create a very small square. And he stands inside the square, and he starts to paint it. And the judges come over, and they start to laugh, and they go, what is that? That's tiny. You couldn't fit one sheep in that pen. And of course, Seamus says, he says, oh, no, no, no. He says, you don't understand. He says, I'm on the outside. You're standing in it. Right? Now, this is the critique, I think, that happens within the secular world. The secular world looks at the church and says, you're standing in ideology, you're standing in religion, you're in the heart of promising satisfaction and certainty and easy answers. That's what everyone's saying. And so the enlightened secular thinker, the cultured despiser, is standing on the outside laughing at the church. But I think the answer of the radical church is no. You're standing in ideology. You know, you're standing in a world where the promises of the new technologies, the new drugs, the relationships, consumerism, magazines, television are all promising all of the same opiate that religion once did. You're standing in it. And actually, we're on the outside. The point of being part of this community is to free ourselves from the idolatrous God, to free ourselves from the God of certainty and satisfaction, and embrace, hopefully, a different understanding of faith and God, which I would say is, you know, the immanent God who's, you know, in the midst, where two or three are gathered together in love. So we developed a series of what we call decentering practices in Icon, and I'm going to just mention them. These are just things that we invented and I kind of thought up, not knowing what I was doing, to be honest, at the time. But realizing in retrospect, I can cluster them together and see that they are attempting to help people enter into this experience of loss, and entering into hopefully a more resurrection type life. I'm going to use that term occasionally, resurrection life. The first is called the Last Supper. And the Last Supper I set up, must be 20 odd years ago now. And it was the first thing I'd ever set up in relation to Icon. And it was very simple. 12 people in a room over food and wine. We invite a guest to come and talk to us about what they believe and why they believe it. And they sit in the seat of Christ, kind of symbolically. They sit in the center of the table and we sit around. The idea that you are the bringer of truth to us this evening. And we listen to them. They tell us what they think over the starter. Over the main course, we have like Q&A, and over dessert, a kind of wider discussion. And if we don't like what they say, it's their Last Supper, right? Hence it's called the Last Supper. You know, it's kind of like, we're putting you in the seat of Christ, and remember what we did to him, right? So be careful, because we don't like bringers of truth. That's one thing. You know, one thing we all know is the truth does not set you free. We all know that you should push that stuff down, right? That's crazy. The idea that the truth, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Crazy. We build whole institutions to protect us from that idea. That's ridiculous, right? And actually on that, I saw a beautiful documentary by a guy called Ed Dobson, who used to be in the religious right-hand guy of Jerry Falwell. And he actually has is it ALS, that degenerative disease, ALS. And, you know, he's had it for years, and, you know, he has trouble walking and even breathing now. But he really turned away from that conservative, fundamentalist position he had. And he lives in Grand Rapids, and that's actually been very influential in the life of Rob Bell and in the life of that church, Mars Hill. But he has a beautiful series of videos, DVDs, I think they're called Ed's Story. And in one of them, he goes to see a woman who they'd fired from their organization back in the day. And he basically explains that it was terrible. They fired her for no good reason. It was an abuse of their position, and you know, it was a cruel thing to do. And so he went to her to apologize. And it's just this beautiful 15-minute DVD of him apologizing to this woman 20 years later and saying, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry of how I treated you and what I did to you. And I just want you to know that it's really sat with me. And you're on my mind. I've never been able to get it out of my mind. I'm sorry. And it was beautiful, and it was just a beautiful example of instead of the sensible thing, just pushing that down and forgetting about it. That's the sensible thing. He did the mad thing, saying, "Okay, I'm actually going to go and ask for forgiveness. I'm going to say sorry. I'm going to bring it up." And I think that's the madness of, you know, what we see in the Gospels. That commitment, you know. So we put the bringer of truth into that seat. And of course, there's a story that when Napoleon first met the Pope, Napoleon wasn't afraid of the Pope or religion. And he took a crown off the Pope because the Pope was to give him this crown. Napoleon just took it, didn't bow or anything. And then the Pope leant into him and says, I know what you're trying to do. You can't fool me. He says, you're trying to destroy Christianity. And then the Pope said, but you'll never succeed. He says, we've been trying for thousands of years. But so, yeah, it keeps going. But that's the idea, that the bringer of truth. And so that person is someone who we're probably going to disagree with, from a political party that most of us probably have problems with, or a religious tradition or something like that. Not always, but often we try to get a controversial kind of figure. And over food and wine, we communicate, we talk. And probably we discover something that we hadn't seen before. Now, you do one of those events, and it's just an interesting night. But if you do like 12 of those events over the course of the year, they begin to decenter you. You begin to see yourself in a slightly different light. You begin to encounter the other, and it's harder to make them into a two-dimensional figure because they're sitting there. I remember when we brought the Ulster Humanist Society, a couple of guys to be part of the Last Supper, and they have a reputation for being quite hardline. I mean, who would think that Northern Ireland people, we would have hardliners, and we would create hardline irreligious people as well as religious people? But we have, and the Humanist Society was known for being a bit hardline, a bit kind of simplistic and hardline. But we invited this guy, and at first he was kind of a bit nervous, or not nervous, but he was just uncomfortable in the environment. You know, this is what he was considering, a group of Christians, and he was there. Basically, he was going to tell them that we're all thick, you know. And then he started talking about the critiques of Christianity. But of course, what he finds out is most of the people around the table completely agree with him. And then they're like, you think that's bad? Listen to this. And so he began to kind of, you know, feel more at ease. And we began to talk. And so for us around the table, it was like, okay, well, this also, I think that these people are two-dimensional. They're like fundamentalist atheists. Well, no, they're not. This guy's really smart. And he's had a really crazy experience of church and religion. And he's actually an interesting guy, and he's going, oh, no, these people, you know, these are actually, they have critiques that are as harsh, or if not harsher than I do, and they're not defensive about what I'm saying. And at the end, they invited me to go and give a talk in the Ulster Humanist Society. And after that, they even asked me to take part in a debate with the Christian Union at the time in Queens. They wanted me to be on their side about an afterlife, right? Which is really nice. So suddenly everything became a little bit confused in that most beautiful of ways. No, they weren't all like that, of course, but the best ones were. A second decentering practice that we've already talked about, I talked about last night, so I'll be very quick about it, is the evangelism project. And that's just an extension of the Last Supper, where we went, okay, let's go to the other and let's see ourselves through their eyes. What would it be like if once a month we went from the Jewish community to the Islamic community to Scientology to whatever? Let's do this, the Hare Krishnas, and let's go and we sit. Watch what they do, because that's key, because at first you go, oh my goodness, these guys are crazy. Look at the crazy stuff they do. And then you look at your own church and go, oh my goodness, imagine you were coming from some other country. You've got, what are you doing in rows? You sit in rows and stand and kneel, and what's going on, you know? But you only realize how crazy kind of you look when you see yourself through the other's eyes. So you see the craziness of this other group. And then you go, okay. And then, of course, as I've said, you ask them, what do we look like to you? Because we're all like, and churches are like a factory that builds products, like this pen. And the factory at its best is trying to create the pen. It's not wanting to create pollution, but factory creates an externality, pollution. And the pollution goes across and it creates acid rain thousands of miles away, right? Now, the first thing that kind of has to happen is that the people who are getting rained on the pollution, they have to kind of go to the factory and go like, you know, you're creating pollution here, and we're dying of it. And then the factory has two choices. Either they go, well, we don't care, right? And then you discover basically what the factory's really like. Or the factory goes, all right, okay, we're going to have to take responsibility for that. And they change their practices. But the factory can only really get to know that the pollution they're creating when they encounter the people who are being hurt by it. I remember when I was 17 and we were sitting around in a bar, and I was like, we were using the term gay. That's so gay, right? And a few of us used it a few times. And then a few days later, a friend of mine I saw him, and he was like, remember a couple of days ago we were in the bar, and you guys were saying, oh, that's so gay. He says, I'm gay, and I was a bit embarrassed. It was like being gay was something bad, or. And suddenly I saw myself through his eyes, and I was like, oh my goodness. And I could have done one of two things. Either I could go, that's not what I meant, and try and defend myself, or kind of have to bite the bullet and go, yeah, I was a bit of an ass, actually, and you've exposed something in me that I didn't see. And that was a powerful experience where I began to rethink things that I wasn't even aware of. I needed the other person's eyes to see myself. So the Evangelism Project is a decentering practice designed to do that, to enact that. Again, you don't talk about it. You do it. We just do it. The other one which I mentioned as well is the Omega course. I'll do actually Atheism for Lent first. But Atheism for Lent, because it was the third one we developed. Atheism for Lent is kind of what it says on the tin. Over Lent, we thought, what can we give up? Okay, let's give up God. That seems interesting, right? What better way of approaching the crucifixion, where God cries out, Jesus cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Than if we over Lent read the greatest critiques of Christianity and of God and of religion. Not to judge them and to let them judge us. What would it be like if our Lenten reading was not so much giving up God, that's the kind of playful way of saying it, but over Lent, we would, in one sense, put our faith to one side. Maybe even say we're not going to pray for the 40 days, we're not going to attend church, we're not going to do that. We're going to spend some time with Nietzsche. We're going to cuddle in with Freud. We're going to go through the fiery brook of Feuerbach. We're going to look at Marx's critique and see what happens. And whenever we were doing this, I remember occasionally people would say, what's going to happen if we do this? People wanted reassurance that at the end of this process, they're not going to lose their faith or something like that. But I had to be very careful not to give them that. Not to say, oh yeah, it'll be fine. Because then I've just taken all the spike out of it. All of the danger, all of the possible. And I actually don't know what's going to happen at the end of it. But so what I have to do in that situation is go, listen, I don't know. This might transform you in ways that you don't even know. You may come back to where you were when you started, but it might deepen your thinking. I don't know. But I'm committed to going on this journey with you. In fact, there's 12 of us here. We're going to all go through it over 40 days. We're going to meet once a week, and let's see what happens. But of course, I'm telling you this because we're not doing it. This is the kind of training in a sense. I can't think of a person who didn't find it challenging and didn't also find themselves agreeing with most of the critiques that they read, and also find themselves at the place at the end where they're going, I don't feel any less Christian than I did when I started this. And if anything, I feel a little bit lighter because I've been able to kind of express some of the concerns I have. Because to be honest, what you'll see in most of the critiques of religion, and I think most of you will know this because I know a lot of you are well read and will be reading even the kind of the most recent critiques and the new atheist critiques, you'll know that most of it's stuff that we agree with anyway. Absolutely, most of it's a destruction of the false god, of the God that we don't want. This God who is like going to make us sleep well at night. The God who helps us feel that, there's an answer when we don't understand something. The God of the gaps. That God's attacked. And actually, hey, we can countersign to that critique. But I don't want to do that in advance. We go through this. The original idea was actually from a book by a conservative Christian philosopher, a really good philosopher, a really lovely man. I've met him, called Merrill Westphal, who wrote a book called Suspicion and Faith. Actually, it would be great. That's one for the future because I think you guys would like it. And it's the subtitle is Atheism for Lent, and he reads Nietzsche, Marx, Freud, and Feuerbach, and he uses them as a way of purifying the faith. He says these are the masters of suspicion that pull away the dregs, the bad stuff, the crusty things, and actually help us to find a more robust faith. But the truth is, after we did his book the first year, of course we were like, okay, we're going to have to go to the real stuff. It's all very well reading somebody else talking about somebody, but let's actually read these guys. And now what I've been doing is developing that. So next year, and you might want to you can be part of this if I actually get around to doing it. I'm going to have 40 different excerpts, readings from, and also DVDs and comedies and all these great atheistic critiques, right from early on, right to the contemporary, right to people like Ricky Gervais or Darren Brown and all of that. And over 40 days, there will be a little thing that you get every day to reflect on and to bring you up to the point where Christ cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And again, it's a decentering practice. It decenters you because it challenges us. And it challenges the belief, behave, belong model of church, which again, many of you will not embrace now, but will probably all of you will recognize, where what's most important is what you believe. So if you encounter somebody on the street, they say, do you believe Jesus died for your sins and you can, be freed from those sins or whatever? And if you say yes, then it's behavior. They say, well, pray and repent of your sins and you can enter into the new life, and you do that, and then belong. Then you're part of the community. You can enter into the church and be part of the church. And that model, by and large, you see that within contemporary churches today. Now, of course, within Judaism, it's very different. It's like a child. A child belongs before there's any belief or behavior. A child is born into the family and is a member of the family. And then actually behavior comes second. The rituals of the family life, from walking in the park on a Sunday afternoon to always having dinner together with the relatives on a Tuesday night, whatever it is, the rituals of the family life. And then belief comes in. And belief at first, when the child's young, they just embrace pretty much everything that the parents believe. And then in adolescence, you kind of push against and find your own feet, right? And that's an important part, differentiating from the parents. Something that Kester Bruin writes beautifully on in a theological sense in a book called Mutiny, which I'd really recommend. It's all about pirates as well, so pirates and Christianity. But then finally, in adulthood, there's a mix of some agreement, some disagreement. But belief is not the important bit. You still belong to the family and in the family. And so the Atheism for Lent, it just implicitly critiques the believe, behave, belong model, because you end up critiquing your beliefs, maybe having more doubts or just being honest maybe about the doubts that you have at the end of it. And then potentially going, oh, but actually, I don't feel any less, Christian. I don't, whatever that means. I don't feel any, and I feel more a part of this community than ever. And so, without even knowing it, I think you're entering into a different type of faith that's not against doubt, but that can have doubt in the very midst of it, working and operating within it. And then the Omega Course. And the Omega Course really came from the desire to say, well, atheism for Lent, that was great, but the atheists that we're looking at, they're mostly from the outside, looking in. But actually, some of the greatest critiques and questions on Christianity actually are within Christianity. That's a challenge we have sometimes, is whenever people are critiquing Christianity, as if we've never heard the critiques, as if we've gone, oh my goodness, seriously? We go like, no, these critiques are all in here. Have you read Kierkegaard? We have these. Have you read the prophets? The critique of the church is actually part of the tradition of the church. And so the Omega Course was partly about bringing that out and showing that there's a range of questions and discussions going on within Christianity itself. Again, a very Jewish notion, like that Jewish parable about this young guy comes to an old rabbi and says, teach me the wisdom of God. And the rabbi laughs. He says, you're in your 20s, forget it. Like, come back and, when you're 30. And the guy goes, no, test me. And he says, okay, he says, you want to know the wisdom of God? You think you're smart? He goes, yeah, I know Aristotelian logic. I know symbolic logic. Give me the wisdom of God. And he says, well, answer me this. Two people come down a chimney, and at the bottom of the chimney, one has soot in their face and one doesn't. Who washes their face? And the guy says, well, the person with the soot in his face. And the old rabbi says, no. Go away. He says, no, of course not. The guy without the soot in his face, because he sees the guy with the soot in his face, he thinks, I must have soot on my face, therefore he washes his face. Right? And the young guy goes, oh, right, okay, I see what you mean. He says, oh, test me again. And the rabbi says, okay, I'll ask you a different question. Two guys come down a chimney, and at the bottom, one has soot in their face and one doesn't. Who washes their face? The guy goes, oh, the guy without the soot in his face. The rabbi stops him and says, don't be stupid. He says, the guy with the soot in his face, he feels it in his eyes, tastes it in his mouth, he washes his face, stop trying to be smart, come back to me in 10 years. And the guy goes, no, try me one more time. And the rabbi says, okay, this time I'll ask you a different question. Two guys come down a chimney, and at the bottom, one has soot in their face and one doesn't. Who washes their face? The young guy says, oh, was it my first answer for different reasons? And the rabbi says, no, he says, they both wash their face. How can you not come down a chimney and not think you've got soot on your face? Go away and come back in 10 years, right? So you're like, what does this parable mean? But I think you can understand it as a way of saying, you're too young. You're still looking for the right answer. You're still looking for the answer. You're still coming in and going, there's an answer to this question. No, this is about entering into a debate, a discussion, fighting back and forth. You're not ready for this because you're still caught up in what's the right answer. Come back to me when you're a little bit more, you can handle ambivalence, when you can handle doubt and complexity. Come back then, and then we'll have a discussion. And that's ironically the point when some people have to leave the church. That's the irony. It's the very point when you start asking questions about whether you believe in God or the Bible or this or that. That's the point they show you the door. Well, that's the point you should be going, come on in, the water's warm. Come on, enjoy it. This is it. You're entering into this conversation. And so the Omega course is designed to do that. And we actually use the material from Living the Question, some of their material, to kind of help spark this off. Each of these is a practice that is like the technology of the theory, the way for us to begin to see ourselves through the eyes of the other, the atheists, the outsiders, the this, the that, begin to see ourselves and begin to try to bring that critique in and use it as an instrument of our further conversion, that the other becomes an instrument of our further transformation. And then there's the transformance art element. And the transformance art element is simply that in liturgical forms we try to live this stuff out. I mentioned the sins of the father. There's things you can do in church like that where you could ask people to think about, what are you angry with God about? What do you want to scream and cry at God about? Just think about it. And we've got this singer-songwriter from a local cafe, and we heard them singing, and I thought they were really good. They were talking about how difficult life can be, and we just thought we'd invite them in to do a song. So as they're singing, just think about that. And we're going to give those to God, or we're going to write them down. And we've got a couple of people here who are going to share a couple of things. Because you know what? In the Psalms, look at this. People are angry and frustrated and shout at God. That's okay. Sometimes you got to do that. Get things off your chest. And I think God, if God's there, is big enough to cope with it, right? Just as if, for example, a mother with a child has just had a child, and she is nursing the child, and every night she has to get up and do this, and her husband's lying in bed, sleeping beside her, right, whatever. And she's looking after the kid, and although she's loving the child and feeling deeply enriched by the child, there's also potentially a part of her that's like, I could throttle this child. This is so annoying. I'm so tired. I'm exhausted or whatever. And there's my bloody husband sleeping, whatever. And at some point, she might take it out on her husband, or she might take it out on her mum or her dad or whatever, because she has to not take it out on the child. She can't do that. The child is helpless. The child doesn't deserve that emotion, but that emotion has to go somewhere. And so another person who is sympathetic absorbs that. And it's a process where you can, and the person goes like, I didn't mean that, it's not you. And go like, yeah, of course I know that. I can absorb that. Or if I'm really stressed in work and I can't shout at my boss because otherwise I'll get fired, and I come back and I shout at, if I've got a partner, my partner. And then, but hopefully they're big enough to be able to go, yeah, it's okay, I understand, I can take that. And a lot of us can't do that because if we had unstable backgrounds, we're scared that if we let loose on somebody, they're going to not be able to take it, and we put that onto the universe. So if we let loose, something terrible is going to happen. But I think it's healthy for us to be able to let loose in that way. And so transforms out. There's the say sins of the father we talked about already. We had a beautiful gathering. It was called the God Delusion, and I remember it was in this. It was in Greenbelt, that most of you know. And we had this 18-foot woman. They're hard to find, right? But she was standing in the, she was standing. This woman, she was standing on step ladders, but she had this woolen dress that we made out of second-hand sweaters, and there were threads coming across the room from the big dress. The people who were knitting new clothes out of the unraveling of this big, massive dress. And then everyone was wearing unraveling clothes who was taking part. And on the big stage, there was actually a tiny marionette. So it was kind of interesting. Out there was this massive woman, and on the stage was this tiny marionette who was conducting the evening. But the evening itself was, when you walked in, there were people selling solutions called the solution. Drink this, and everything will be okay. Put this patch on, and that will hold you together. And the patch would say, you know, reason or God or science or youth or beauty or whatever. And so these people were giving out these things that will hold you together. Now, when you went in, over the course of the night, it started with the idea of unraveling, the word unraveling, and there were stories and reflections and whatever on that theme. But at one point, the unraveling became raveling. And there was a woman who was taking apart hundreds of origami cranes. Because the interesting thing is, raveling and unraveling mean exactly the same thing. Didn't know this before, but they do. To ravel, to ravel just sounds kind of more positive because you don't have the un in front of it. And the whole thing was about going, well, you know, we unravel things, and then in the moment of unraveling, there's often a point when we say, no, this is not negative. This is raveling. This is positive. This is something good. And we finished with a benediction, which is, instead of go in peace, the Catholic Mass ends, we ended with go in pieces. I might read this tomorrow as part of the service, and we all got some of the thread from the dress. Go in pieces to see and feel your world. This liturgical in action. One more, just as an example of, was called fundamentalism, and actually there were protesters outside this one as people were coming in. People were protesting about icons, going to hell and all of this. Now there were our people. We'd set the protest up, but people didn't know that. Even Greenbelt didn't know it. They were going to call the police, and we were like, yeah, call the police, get rid of them. And some people were agreeing with them, so it was really interesting outside. Yeah, icon are really bad. It's terrible. So this is all going on, and they were handing out a flyer that was against me. That was a real flyer written by this guy called Cecil Andrews. He from Belfast. He was really nice. I met him at the end of a talk, and he asked this question completely unrelated to my talk. He was just there to kind of get me. But we had a chat at the end. He says, I'm actually writing a tract about you. And I said, oh, right, very good. What's it called? And he was giving me a few title names, and one of them was, I was thinking of calling it God in the Hands of Angry Sinners. God in the hands of an angry sinner. And I was like, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. You've got to name it that. That's really good. And so he's like, you sure? You sure? I go, yeah, absolutely. So he wrote this tract, and it was really nice. He said, oh, Pete's a nice guy. And then he kind of attacked me. So we were handing out that. When you walked in, there was like 5 people standing on the stage, and with a soapbox. And at first, this guy gets up and sings a worship song. I think if I get this right. And at first, the worship song is just a regular worship song, and some people are singing, some people aren't. But then the words fade away, and it comes in, they're saying, I am the truth. Be my friend. Don't be my enemy. I'll crush my enemies beneath my feet. So this song is all about God as the truth and the way and the life. But in the midst of it, these words are coming out about, I crush my enemies because I am the truth. So it's like a bit icky, a bit weird. Suddenly it gets a bit uncanny. And then he tells a story of how he used to be a worship leader and how he became an atheist and how, how that was handled in his church. And at different points, people got on the soapbox and said things. One woman got up and said nothing for like about 2 minutes. And then the verse saying a woman should remain silent in church. And then she just stood back down. Another woman got up and she gave this beautiful 3-minute sermon called The Singing Ministry of Christ. And it was beautiful, and there was DJ doing music behind it. And as soon as she finished, then the same sermon was heard from Ian Paisley. And you realize it's his sermon. This is one of his sermons. This beautiful sermon called The Singing Ministry of Christ was his. And we went through, we ended up with the word believe on rice paper, and we gave our beliefs to each other to consume. These are my beliefs given to you. You ask, what did it mean? I have no idea, but it was nice, this experience. But the idea was of Transformance Art was to try to find ways to let people express something to bring something to the surface. And that's what I think liturgy at its best does, and the use of hymns at their best and sermons at their best are beautiful. Like who today goes to hear people speak? There's only two places, church and comedians. They're the place where we go to hear, and they're very similar. Comedians, pastors need to learn from comedians, because comedians tell the truth with laughter and with poetry, with stories. They bring things to the surface. And a beautiful sermon does the same. A beautiful sermon doesn't tell you what to think. That just creates a church where everyone thinks the same. A beautiful sermon opens up something, brings something to the surface. It's an art form as much as as playing the piano or anything like that. And how do we create prayers where we say we're going to do a prayer now where we're actually going to pray this kind of honest prayer about how we sometimes don't care about how our neighbour's doing, and we're angry at our lives, and we're angry at God, and we're frustrated. And then, of course, you help people understand why by showing that this is part of the biblical tradition. And of course, this is not every day or all parts of it, but somehow into the liturgy, you bring the doubt, ambiguity, and complexity that everybody mostly affirms anyway if they're in the kind of churches I assume that you're in. They affirm it anyway. But now the next stage is just go, how can we bring this actually so it's reflected somehow in the material experience of the church itself? Okay, that's really what I wanted to say about the technology of this. We've got time then for one or two questions, because that was just half an hour. Does anybody want to ask a question or make a comment?
I'm interested in your story about the soot and the chimney, because it suggests that you're suggesting that radical theology and questions may be a stage thing, maybe something that you need to get to a certain stage of being able to ask the questions of, which seems to be different from what I think I've heard you say at other times, that these are really questions for everyone, that everyone needs to be answering. I kind of come down on the first one of those. I think it's too much for a lot of people who are in what I'd call an earlier stage of faith to start thinking about uncertainty. So what do you really think?
That's good. I never contradict myself, okay? I just want everybody to know I'm always purely consistent in everything I do, right? That's an interesting question. I mean, I guess when you put it like that, and you've helped me see something that I haven't noticed about that story, I guess I want to say I think we all, in our own different ways, even when we're young, there is a certain amount of questioning and ambiguity that we can cope with, but depending on my main thing is actually trauma is the big thing. Like if I was reading about someone I was reading a psychoanalyst who was talking about this woman whose brother was killed by this drug dealer, right? And a whole family banded together to get these people put in prison. And, so everyone banded together with the brother and were to get the people who killed him put away. Now, in the process of that, they started painting a picture of their brother as basically a saint. Now, this guy wasn't a saint. This guy who had done some pretty bad things himself, right? But they couldn't tolerate any kind of, negative image of their son. So one of this woman's friends pointed out how she'd been hurt by him at some point, and she cut off the friend completely, and basically saw her as persecuting them and couldn't handle being in her presence. Now, the reason for that was because the situation was so extreme and they were banded together to get something done that they couldn't cope with the ambiguity. After the people got put in prison and they were able to do a little bit more mourning, that woman was able to reconcile with her friend, right? I've noticed that the people who can tolerate questions the least are people often who have the most pain in their lives and the most trauma. A woman in Greenbelt 3 years ago, when I was doing something with Padraig and Vince Anderson, I think, and I got off the stage because Padraig was giving a poem, and this woman came up to me and started shouting at me from the side. She started shouting at me, and I was like, I have to go back up. Let's talk afterwards. So I went back up, finished up, and I was talking to people, and I saw her waiting, and she was waiting, and I was like, oh my goodness, in the quarter mile, I'm going to get it through the neck here. But about 15 minutes passed, eventually everybody left, and then she came over. And the first thing she does is she says, I'm sorry. I've just gone through a really, really tough divorce. You know, my life is falling apart. And when you talked about doubt and embracing your brokenness, I don't know what happened. I was just so angry, so angry. And as we talked, I just realized that it was because of the situation, the immediate situation she was in. That message was too much. On Facebook, about 5 or 6 people started attacking me one day. I must have been mentioned in some fundamentalist church, right? Because they all started attacking me. And I looked, and they hadn't locked down their Facebook. They didn't really know how to use Facebook. So I looked at who they were. And actually, at first, I was like, oh, this will be a laugh to see who these crazy people are. And then I went through their Facebook, and I realized, oh my goodness, these people had, some of them, you know, you could just tell that they'd had such difficult lives, such difficult stuff. So their inability to question was partly, I say, the defense that they were locked down. Now, I also think they can, but that requires a lot of work. I mean, and I don't know them, but so in other words, I'm saying I think most of us, we can do it. The people who find it most difficult are often the ones who are dealing with some of the most difficult and traumatic stuff. Hence, we shouldn't feel, it's not good to feel angry at someone who is holding on to that level of certainty. Often it's a case of trying to find out what that's giving them and work it out. So sorry, it took longer than I wanted to answer that, but there you go. You're standing there. This is always the symbol. He comes up and stands menacingly beside me to try to shut me up. Okay, so that's me. Thank you very much. I will see you tomorrow.